Good evening. My name is Keisha Rogers, and I wanted to welcome you to our LaRouche PAC strategic discussion for July 10th. And tonight I'll be joined by Tony Papert. And the discussion tonight is titled, "Who are the millions the cartels are shipping into the country? No one knows." Now we're going to find out more about that from Tony in his discussion. I must say that this discussion will be a continuation in developing further on what Bob Ingram last week took up in discussion with Michael Steger. And I will post his discussion from last week in the Q&A in the chat box. For those of you who are listening after this presentation on YouTube to the opening introduction by Tony, I would really recommend that people get involved in the discussions. What you will do is you go to LaRouchePAC.com and you sign up for our under Get Active for our discussions. And this will prompt you with an email on how you can join the live discussions with us, which we don't post on YouTube, but are very critical for you to engage in as we are entering into the most decisive election period, where this past weekend, President Trump participated in the last week or so, participated in a few different events, campaign events in Iowa, in South Carolina. He spoke with representatives or campaign workers in Nevada. And so we're going to be discussing, as we have been, the policies of President Trump, his Agenda 47, what he's doing to take on the deep state, the cartels that go after the drug traffickers, but what he's doing to present a positive solution to how we get out of this crisis. We know that the Biden administration is nothing but total criminal disaster for our nation. But the question is not to sit back and wait and see what's going to happen, but for you, we the people, to actually take action. And President Trump has been laying out what's essential to take that action. Now, I want to say that I know this past weekend, starting on Independence Day, people might have noticed, and some of you may have actually gone out with your family and friends and watched a recent movie that came out. And you have noticed from the standpoint, this was a movie that features the role of the special agent Tim Ballard on human trafficking and what's happening at our border. We're going to be discussing
Song of Freedom, right? That's the
Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom.
Yes.
Sound of Freedom.
And this is featuring, if people may have seen, Tim Ballard, who is the founder of Operation Underground, has actually been featured in this movie. And I have to say, I went and watched that, and some people in the discussion will probably have things to say about this movie. But I think the most important thing is what Tony's going to discuss of how, as we were talking about, as Bob presented last week, on the question of what is required to win the war on drugs, how the interrelation of the war on drugs, human trafficking, the operations around the banking cartel are all one and the same, and what it's going to take to shut that operation down, to protect children, to protect our people from fentanyl, drug overdoses, to stop the sex trafficking, human trafficking. And this is something that Lyndon LaRouche and the LaRouche Political Action Committee have been working on for decades. So with that, we'll get further into discussion. I know that President Trump has worked on this throughout his campaign. He actually participated in a number of signing of legislation and bills on stopping human trafficking in his recent Agenda 47, which I'm going to post that in the chat and make it available later. He actually talks about naming the cartels as a and naming the cartels as a foreign terrorist organization. So with that, that's just an opening for Tony to go further into detail in those discussions and to talk about what's actually going on at our southern border and what we are committed to doing about it.
Yeah,
So, Tony,
terrific. Thanks so much, Keisha. I'd like to begin not with me, but with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I'm sure people know is running for the Democratic nomination for president. And regardless of where you stand on that, and on other aspects of what he believes, he recently visited the border and reported on it to a town meeting in New Hampshire sometime around a week ago. And I found his firsthand testimony extremely important and extremely valid. And it does indeed show, as Keisha was saying, and we'll discuss fully, that the movie The Sound of Freedom, the drug trafficking, the fentanyl plague, this is all the same thing. So I'd like to begin with RFK Jr.'s remarks. I'll have a few things to say as he's speaking, and then I'll take it up from there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently gave a town hall in New Hampshire, and he graphically and vividly described his experience at the border crossing at Yuma. I think his description is very useful. Many people are not confronting what's really happening at the border. And I hope if I summarize what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saw there, people will begin to look at this thing finally. He said he had expected to see a lot of Central Americans coming across, people from El Salvador, Panama, and Guatemala. But that's not what he saw. The first group he saw was all Africans, military-age African men, mostly from Senegal. The next group that came across, and they're just people waiting in line to cross, hundreds and hundreds of people come in buses of 55 each. They're left off about half a mile away, and they walk to the gap in the fence. He went and talked to them, and they were only two families from Latin America in this second group, one from Colombia, one from Peru. The rest were from Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Tibet, Kazakhstan, Nepal, China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Eastern Europe. He said the processing was insane. They're brought across the border, fingerprinted to see if they have criminal records. If they don't, Border Patrol asks them one question: do you have a contact in this country? If they say yes, Border Patrol says, can you put us on the phone with that contact? If they can do that, if they can get them on a cell phone, a Border Patrol agent asks the contact, if we put this family on an airplane, will you pick them up in Minneapolis or in San Diego or Chicago, New York, wherever it is? And if the person on the phone says yes, the family is taken to an airport, FEMA pays for their ticket, and they go anywhere they want in the country. He notes that 7 million people have come across this way. The cartels control all the immigration, and they've shifted from drug smuggling to make this one of their big profit lines. So they're sending social media videos all over the world, recruiting people from different countries. They have lawyers who are working with them in these countries, and they tell the people exactly what to do. You get on a plane to Mexico City. The cartels then help you, once you land, get a Mexican visa. From there, they put you on an internal plane to Mexicali. At that airport, the cartels have a parking lot filled with buses. You get on one of those buses, and they drive you to the crossing. There are 9 big crossings on the border. I was at the one in Yuma. That night, probably 600 to 800 people came across. And the little town of Yuma is bearing a lot of the national burden because a lot of these people are sick, so they go to the hospital. There are a lot of pregnant women. RFK talked to them and spent a day with the head of the hospital. That man said that a few months ago, there were so many pregnant immigrants in his hospital, they occupied 32 of the 35 beds on the maternity ward. A lot of local women who had scheduled pregnancy inductions, induced births, cesarean sections, whatever, could not get in and had to cancel or postpone their appointments. He said he had spent $27 million of the hospital's budget last year unreimbursed to take care of immigrants. Kennedy also talked with the sheriff, who told him that because the entire Border Patrol is now processing people into the U.S., there's nobody guarding the border, and drugs are pouring across through the other places. If you're a smuggler, a bad guy, you don't come through that fence at Yuma. Those are all people who intend to stay in this country. They're given a court date 7 years from now. And at the same time, there's 1 million immigrants, really 1.1 million immigrants, who are trying to come in legally through the legal process, which could take them 8 or 10 or 20 years. And this is like a stick in the face for those people who are trying to come in legally. Kennedy said, no country can survive if it can't control its borders, and we're not doing that. But here's the good news. Everyone he talked to there said it's easy to stop. They were doing it before. Kennedy said he didn't like to hear this because he isn't a big fan of Donald Trump. He didn't like the wall. But what Border Patrol and everyone else said is, you don't need to build a physical barrier from San Diego, 2,200 miles, to Brownsville, Texas. You only need a physical barrier in certain places where there are high density populations. The rest of the border you can monitor with ground monitoring. They had very, very sophisticated surveillance and ground monitoring systems. Many of these were put up during the Trump administration. But the Biden administration, when it came in, took down the towers and removed the ground sensing systems. This is not something that I, as a Democrat, wanted to hear, said Kennedy. And then, once it got out that this is an open border, and the cartels saw that there's a huge profit opportunity here, the flow has just increased exponentially. But we can stop it. During the Trump administration, crossings at Yuma were about 10 to 25 a day at most. Now there are 200 to 800 a day. So we can solve this problem. But we need to do it in a way that's sensible, that's common sense, and that is not causing this terrible, terrible humanitarian crisis from where I sat on the border. There's a tree that you can see on the other side of the fence, but it's in U.S. territory. It's called the rape tree. And it's where the cartels extract their final payment from women who come across, sometimes from children. Border Patrol watches helplessly while they do this. Kennedy talked to a Peruvian family who had lost their life savings because the cartels robbed them. They beat them, they extort them, they exploit them. Ultimately, they rape them. And this is a humanitarian crisis that we're creating through government negligence.
Government negligence, and we need to end it for everybody's sake.
Great. Thank you so much. He ended with the description of the rape tree. And I think you'll see, and he said that rape tree is on U.S. territory. But that rape tree is on U.S. territory, but what he doesn't say, and perhaps he doesn't realize, is that the cartels have been bringing through millions of people. They've been bringing through millions of people whom they choose, and as you hear from what he said, and we'll discuss it further, they choose these people, they select where they're going to go. They're colonizing the United States within a flood of millions of people. So there is a rape tree there on U.S. territory, which the border guards watch and are helpless to do anything about. But there's probably the same rape tree in your city right now where you're watching this, because it's been brought here by the operations of the cartels. So we may get back to that very instructive answer of RFK, but let me just take it on from there. So as he said, these are no longer just dope cartels. They are full service cartels. Drugs, human trafficking, kidnapping, prostitution, allegedly organ harvesting, and other things, extortion. And it all works together. The most obvious thing, and those of you who watched Bill Malugin's reports on the Tucker Carlson show before Fox shut it down, you know how this human trafficking or human smuggling across the border by the cartels is completely part of their drug trafficking, because they completely control the border, and therefore they control the understaffed border patrol, where the border patrol can go. All this was shown graphically in Bill Malugin's reports. So they bring a bunch of refugees over to one area. The border patrol has to rush over there, leave other parts of the border completely empty. And as he said, if you were listening, they took down the electronic sensors which Trump put up there. So they're blind. So they use the fact that they've attracted the border patrol over to one place to put through a bunch of people in camouflage gear. And again, these were all shown on TV, with satchels of drugs through another section of the border. So they control it. And the whole thing it operates as one unity. I mean, back in 2022, early 2022, the New York Times had a big story on the terrible child labor scandal, which had arisen under the same policy. The Biden administration had allowed in, and of course the cartels brought in, about 130,000 unaccompanied minors across the border in 2021. Under the regulations, these were all supposed to be placed with so-called sponsors who had told HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, that they would send these are minors, that they would send the children to school and do other things for them. And HHS was supposed to check up on these sponsors, but actually a third of the kids they completely lost track of. And what follow-up they were able to do was cursory. I mean, again, it's like the Border Patrol. HHS and all these things are being overwhelmed by the mass of people which the cartels are bringing in this case, minors. So the great majority of them are sent to work when they're supposed to be in school. Many of them are working 12-hour days in jobs which children, our minors, are not even supposed to be allowed to be employed in. Dangerous factory jobs with, menace to losing limbs, roofing jobs. One, I think it was a 13-year-old from South America, fell off the roof and died working a 12-hour roofing shift prohibited to minors. So it's fully documented, but it's only the smallest part of this massive scandal. Now, but what's really going on? Just very simple. I mean, all the refugees they were applying for refugee status. Let's call them refugees. All the refugees RFK spoke to had a phone number of somebody in the United States. And the condition for their admission was that they would make a cell phone call to this phone number, and Border Patrol would ask the person who picked up the phone will you meet this person at the airport? Where'd they get the phone number? Well, from the cartels. And who's answering the phone? Somebody the cartels put up to answer the phone. So what is going to happen to these people? Well, many of them have not paid the full smuggling fee to the cartels. How much is it? It's like everything in this. There's widely varying information from, $5,000 to $15,000, and in cases like people coming from China, other places in Asia, it can be much higher, $25,000. So let's say they haven't paid the full fee. Who's answering the phone? A cartel enforcer. They're going to go up there and be at best an indentured servant, an indentured slave, slaving for the cartel, maybe in one of their marijuana farms, or in a regular job, giving their whole paycheck to the cartel as a slave to pay off this fee. At best. I mean, maybe they're going into prostitution. Maybe their organs are going to be harvested. Again, this has not been proven. There's many allegations that the cartels are doing this in Mexico. So we are seeding the United States with, all the estimated 7 million. It's one estimate that came across so far in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. They're not all indentured slaves. We just don't know. As I said in the title for the show, we don't know who they are. But a great many of them are indentured servant slaves who are being put in locations selected for them around the country by the cartels, so that the cartels are colonizing the United States with their all-around full-service organized crime. So that's what we're going through. That's what's going on. When RFK said no nation can survive if it doesn't control its borders, and perhaps he could have said even further, no nation can survive if it gives over control of its borders to what is likely the most violent and brutal criminal organization in the world. A nation which hands control of its borders over to such an organization can probably not survive. And how is it we're not going to survive? What will happen to us? Well, one of the things that will happen to us is the result of giving the cartels carte blanche to colonize the United States with their members, with foreigners who have some connection to them, with indentured slaves, with victims of human trafficking, prostitution, and of course, with the dope trade. I mean, if you think that the deaths of fentanyl we've seen so far, it's 100,000 overdose deaths per year in the United States, more than 100,000. The bulk of them, the majority of them involving fentanyl. That's only what we've seen so far. That's before this process of bringing the cartels over here to colonize this country under cover of a massive wave of migration run by the cartels. So there's great difficulty getting, as you may see from my discussion or perhaps other things you've read about this, there's tremendous difficulty getting accurate numbers or any accurate information on this whole thing. The Biden administration, and particularly Secretary Mayorkas and those who agree with him, have have done continual shifting of terms. They've ceased issuing statistical reports from Homeland Security and Customs, which were previously issued. They've shifted terminology. They've made rulings which are vague. So they've made it very, very difficult to get accurate information. And that's the reason, I mean, you're not going to get accurate numbers from anybody right yet. I would note that when the Biden administration came in, I mean, on the first day, as many of you may know, Biden trashed many of President Trump's measures to try to control immigration. He tried to end the Remain in Mexico policy. He was restrained from doing so by a court for some time. He immediately stopped building the wall. He took other immediate steps to reverse the means by which RFK referred to reverse the means by which Trump had controlled the problem. But the Biden administration, probably Biden himself, when they first came in 2020, or 2021 rather, was not hell-bent on having totally open borders under cartel control to bring in everybody they can, if only because they're making so much money, everybody they bring in. That was not the way the administration started. There was a fight in the administration during 2021, which was chronicled in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, among other publications. Biden and his advisor Klain, even also Susan Rice, wanted to do something to stem the huge flow which was underway from the election, on the way up from Mexico, from the election through the inauguration and beyond. You may remember there were massive caravans coming up at the time, and all of these were run and controlled completely by the cartels. So they did certain things which were unpopular among some. For instance, they deported several plane loads of refugees to Haiti to try to discourage the Haitians from paying the smugglers to make the trip if they were only going to be returned back on planes. So there was a fight about this in the early days of the administration, but Klain, Susan Rice, if that's what they were fighting for, and Biden himself, if he was on that side, they lost the fight. Mayorkas and the others who supported this totally bedlam situation we have now under cartel control won the fight. And since then, the entirety of the policy under every name has had the Biden's policies and Mayorkas policies, the entirety of their policies have had only one objective, which is bring in the maximum number of illegals possible at all times. So, I mean, we had the concepts of humanitarian parole. It said that on certain occasions where there was special hardship, somebody who did not get refugee status could be, quote, paroled, so that in that particular hardship situation, he could remain in the United States, even though he didn't have refugee status. The Biden administration took that policy, which was intended to be for humanitarian special cases, and applied it to all the thousands of refugees, or supposed refugees, whom RFK met at the Yuma crossing and all the others. They had many other policies which were supposed to be exceptions for special cases, which were applied across the board to everybody without any consideration of any special case. They also virtually stopped deportations. Now, I mean, one excuse for that is that the Border Patrol is fully engaged in processing immigration, migrants or refugees, supposed refugees and immigrants into the interior of the United States. They don't have time to do deportations. But be that as it may, I mean, Mayorkas, the law as it was written is that immigrants who come in illegally, who commit or who have committed aggravated felonies, should be deported, even if they're not found near the US border. Having committed aggravated felonies, they should be deported. In 2021, Mayorkas issued an order saying, well, we have the right to deport people who have committed aggravated felonies, but we should be sensitive about executing that right. We should do research on each individual case. Did he commit aggravated felonies under race discrimination? Did he have other circumstances which should be considered in the commission of his aggravated felonies? You must do a research job on each case before deportation, even though he has committed aggravated felonies and according to the law should be deported. And finally, the order said, having done all this research, before doing a deportation, you should submit the case to your superior. So, I mean, the Border Patrol was furious because they said, we've applied the law for years. We know how to apply the law. We don't need all this stuff. We don't have to go to superiors. And how long is the guy going to hang around while we do all this research and wait for an answer? So this order of Mayorkas in 2021 was suspended by a judge until recently, but then just, I think, last week, it was upheld by the Supreme Court. So the deportations under the Biden administration, which were already, I think, about 10% of the number under the Trump administration, are now going to be a hell of a lot lower now that that order comes into effect. I think that covers essentially what I wanted to lay out. I mean, you with us there, watching and listening across the country, I'm sure you have a lot of things you'd like to say about this. Many naive people view the open border policies, which is what we have, as a humanitarian policy, which assists people in poor countries to the south of our southern border. And, you know, now that they've heard they're coming from Asia and Africa and Eastern Europe, maybe they think it's a humanitarian policy which assists these people. But it's not. It's as RFK Jr., precisely as he says, it's a humanitarian catastrophe. It's putting desperate people in the maws of the worst criminals in the world. It's subjecting our country, as I say, to a colonization, what you could call a creeping takeover by the dope cartels, which are really, as I've said from the beginning, they're no longer dope cartels. They're all-purpose criminal organizations doing every kind of crime, and with the assistance of the control of the U.S. border, a situation which certainly has never existed in our country and probably in any other. For those who would like to watch it, I would like it if Keisha could put the URL of that RFK town hall in the chat. And why don't we open up to questions and discussion? I'm sure people have a lot to say.